"You cannot win," she said. His response left the immortal Empress speechless. The throne world of the immortal Empress floated silently among the stars, a massive spire of crystal and metal that gleamed with power. No one had ever entered her presence and left without awe or fear. Countless civilizations had fallen under her rule, and her name was whispered in every corner of the galaxy as a symbol of strength and inevitability. She had never been defeated. She had never hesitated. She had never faced a force that could challenge her. Until now, Captain Elias Kane stepped off the small human transport onto the surface of the palace moon. The air shimmered with artificial gravity, and the ground beneath him felt colder than he expected, a reminder that this was no ordinary world. Towering above him was the Grand Palace, its spires stretching high, catching the light of 3 suns. Human engineers would have called it impossible to construct, yet here it was. He took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of his satchel. He carried no weapons, no army, and no shields beyond the small protective field around his suit. Humanity had survived for centuries without the same raw power the aliens wielded. Today, he would prove that ingenuity and courage could go further than brute strength. The doors of the palace opened before him without a touch. He did not rush inside. Every step he took echoed through the vast hallways, and his eyes absorbed every detail. The polished floors, the alien script glowing along the walls, and the statues of past rulers whose eyes seemed to follow him. He felt the weight of history pressing down, yet he did not falter. Elias had faced impossible odds before, and he knew fear was a tool, not a chain. Finally, he reached the central chamber. The air changed. It was warmer here, heavier. And there she sat, the immortal Empress, perched on a throne that seemed to float slightly above the floor. Her eyes, glowing faintly violet, scanned him, piercing him like rays of light through water. She was beautiful in a way that made no human could imagine, ageless, flawless, and terrifying. Her robes shimmered, moving almost as if they had a life of their own. Around her, attendants waited silently, their faces blank masks. She had not risen to greet him. She had no reason to, none ever did. "You are human," she said, her voice like the sound of stars shifting in the void. There was no warmth in it, only authority and judgment. "Why do you come here?" Elias straightened. He did not bow. He did not lower his eyes. "I come with a message," he said simply. "I want to offer peace." The Empress laughed, a sound that echoed across the chamber and made the walls vibrate. "Peace," she said. "You are bold, little human. Do you not know what I have done to worlds that refuse to bow?" "I know," Elias replied evenly, "and I know the cost of war. I am here to prevent that cost from rising." The Empress' expression did not change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you think words can stop me? Do you think your fragile race can stand where millions before you have fallen?" Elias paused, then smiled. "I do not expect to stand with weapons or power. I stand with reason, courage, and a will that will not break." A flicker of surprise crossed the Empress' face. Humans were clever, yes, but no one had ever spoken to her like that before. They had either cowered, obeyed, or tried to hide behind armies. Elias had done neither. "Guards," she said finally, her voice sharp as a blade. "Take him to the holding chamber. I will decide what to do with him." 2 towering alien soldiers stepped forward, their armor clinking softly. They moved like predators, silent and precise. Elias did not resist. He knew that any fight here would be pointless. Instead, he walked with them, keeping his posture calm. As he passed through the palace corridors, he noticed the subtle details the Empress attendants had overlooked. A panel slightly ajar, a maintenance hatch, the faint hum of a failing coolant system. Small things. Insignificant things. But to a human trained in problem-solving, they were opportunities. He made a mental note. The holding chamber was large but stark, with no windows and only a small control panel beside the door. Elias stepped inside and let the door seal behind him. He did not pace, he did not fret. Instead, he studied the panel. Something about it seemed off. The energy readouts fluctuated. The cooling system was overtaxed. If left unchecked, the chamber would fail within the hour, creating a containment breach that could endanger everyone nearby. He touched the panel lightly, and the screen flickered. His fingers danced across the alien interface, a mix of trial and error and intuition. The temperature dropped back to safe levels. Systems stabilized. He exhaled slowly. He had just saved the palace guards from a disaster they did not even realize was happening. Moments later, the Empress appeared on the view screen above the panel. "What have you done, human?" Her voice was both curious and cautious. "I fixed a system you were letting fail," Elias said simply. "It would have put your palace in danger." The Empress stared at the screen, her violet eyes widening. No human had ever touched her systems, much less corrected them. The arrogance, the skill, the calm in the face of danger, it was impossible to ignore. For a moment she was speechless. You did this for them?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than before. "For everyone," Elias replied. "War does not need heroes, it needs people who understand the cost of failure. That is what I am here for." There was silence. Then unexpectedly the Empress spoke again. "You are unlike any human I have ever seen." Elias tilted his head, not in arrogance but in simple acknowledgement. "I am not all of humanity, but I carry what we all have. The drive to survive, the will to solve impossible problems, and the hope that reason can overcome fear." For the first time in centuries, the Empress leaned back in her throne and regarded someone not with the certainty of dominance, but with curiosity. She had defeated kings, generals, and emperors. She had conquered planets, star systems, and alliances. And yet this human, armed with nothing but words, courage, and knowledge, had made her pause. "You will not leave this palace alive if you continue to speak in such ways," she said finally, though her voice lacked its usual finality. "Perhaps not," Elias admitted. "But if I leave nothing behind but my life, I will leave an example, one that shows that even the smallest force can make a difference." The Empress studied him for long moments. Her attendants shifted nervously. Guards whispered among themselves. She had never faced a creature who looked danger in the eye and offered nothing but truth and reason in return. "Perhaps you will be worth my time," she said at last. "Or perhaps you will be my undoing." She rose from her throne, her robes flowing like liquid light. Elias did not flinch. He did not bow. The Empress approached the holding chamber. "We will see soon enough," she said. "I have tests for you, human, tests that will break lesser minds, lesser spirits. We will see if yours can endure." Elias nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Then I look forward to learning, and perhaps teaching as well." As the Empress departed, the human alone in the chamber allowed himself a single thought. The fight ahead would be unlike any he had faced, but humanity had never won by surrendering to fear. The galaxy's most powerful ruler may have thought she was untouchable, but she had underestimated the quiet strength of someone willing to stand with nothing but reason, courage, and hope. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. The palace hummed with power. The immortal Empress may have ruled with unmatched authority, but Elias Kane had arrived with a force she could not yet measure. And in that moment, the first threads of doubt began to creep into her mind. Humanity had arrived in her throne room, not with weapons, but with the audacity to believe that peace, understanding, and cleverness could matter. The Empress, who had never hesitated in centuries, found herself hesitating for the first time. And somewhere deep in the chamber, a human smiled, knowing that a single step forward, one calm, careful, confident step, was enough to begin a change no empire had ever anticipated. The immortal Empress returned to her throne after leaving Elias Kane in the holding chamber. Her attendants watched her silently, unsure of how to interpret the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had never been challenged in this way. Humans had always been clever, yes, but none had ever dared to face her with courage so calm, so unwavering. Elias did not bow. He did not plead. He did not show fear. He simply existed, and that existence was enough to disturb her centuries of certainty. She considered him carefully. In her vast experience, she had learned that strength alone could rule empires. But Elias demonstrated something she had not measured in centuries: ingenuity, calm reasoning, and a refusal to accept what others considered impossible. That could not be ignored. The Empress decided that if he were to survive, it would not be by chance but by proving that his mind could match her trials. The following day, the chamber doors opened automatically. Elias was summoned to the main hall, a place used for tests and demonstrations. As he entered, he found not a battlefield, but a simulation room unlike any human could imagine. The walls shimmered with holographic projections of alien landscapes, cities, and even entire planetary systems. The Empress appeared at the center, her form towering, her eyes glowing faintly violet. "Your first test," she said, her voice steady, "is simple in concept. Navigate this environment, complete the objectives, survive. Most fail within minutes." Elias stepped forward, examining the holographic terrain. The projection shifted around him, creating obstacles, pitfalls, and challenges that would test physical skill and mental agility. Yet he did not panic. His mind, trained in human problem-solving and improvisation, began calculating paths, analyzing weak points, and predicting sequences. The first obstacle appeared: a collapsing bridge over a chasm filled with molten energy. The simulation expected hesitation, failure. Elias measured the timing of the collapsing segments, jumped precisely, and reached the other side with fluid motion. The Empress' eyes narrowed. The human's calm under pressure was unusual. Most beings would have panicked, stumbled, or failed entirely. Elias had moved with patience, precision, and awareness. Next, the environment shifted to a crowded alien city under siege. He had to navigate through citizens panicking, avoid traps set by invisible enemies, and reach a control center to stabilize the area. Many would have tried brute force, but Elias used observation and ingenuity. He noticed the patterns of movement in the crowd, detected the invisible traps through subtle environmental clues, and created distractions to guide panicked citizens to safety. By the time he reached the control center, the chaos was under control. The Empress, attendants exchanged nervous glances. She remained still on her throne, her expression unreadable. Elias had not only survived the first challenge, but he had done so while protecting others, something the Empress' trials had not expected. Humans rarely fought without self-interest. Yet Elias did, calmly, logically, and without hesitation. The simulation shifted again. This time, he was presented with a diplomatic scenario. Two alien factions were on the brink of open war over a resource-rich planet. The simulation imposed strict constraints: no military intervention, no deception, no threats. The objective was to achieve peace, or at least a ceasefire, in 1 hour of simulated time. Elias studied the factions, noting their histories and motives. He spoke to the leaders, listening first, asking questions that seemed simple but forced them to reflect on common interests they had ignored. He proposed compromises that addressed key concerns for both parties. By the end of the hour, tensions had eased. Both factions accepted a provisional agreement, astonished at how effectively a human could navigate alien politics. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. Elias was not just surviving, he was excelling in ways no simulation should allow. Her centuries of knowledge could not predict his approach. He thought differently. He reasoned differently. He acted differently. The next test was survival in extreme environments. Elias was placed on a barren, hostile planet with no equipment other than a standard human survival suit. Alien storms lashed the terrain, toxic gases drifted across the plains, and predatory fauna, simulated to perfection, hunted relentlessly. Most beings would have perished within hours. Elias observed the patterns of the storm, sought shelter in natural formations, and created simple tools to filter the toxic air. He used his knowledge of physics and biology to improvise traps for predators, ensuring he remained safe while navigating the hostile landscape. The Empress watched silently as the hours passed. Elias had not only survived, but he had turned danger into opportunity, adapting to each threat with skill and reasoning. He did not rely on raw strength, but on intellect, observation, and resilience. His actions demonstrated something the Empress had long considered unnecessary. Humans could endure far beyond what appearances suggested. After completing these trials, Elias was summoned again before the Empress. She studied him closely, her usual composure replaced with a curiosity that bordered on fascination. "You survive where no one else can. You think differently. You act with caution, yet with courage. You inspire loyalty even in those who would otherwise fear you." "How is this possible?" Elias smiled calmly. "We have learned, Empress, that survival is not about power alone. It is about understanding, adaptation, and cooperation. Brute strength alone fails against complexity. Humans endure because we learn, we observe, and we act with purpose." The Empress studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Most humans would have broken under these tests. They would have failed before the first challenge was complete. "Yet you," she hesitated, an unfamiliar pause, "you have succeeded." "I am not all humans," Elias said, "but I carry what we all share: the drive to survive, the will to solve problems, and the hope that reason can achieve more than fear or force ever could." The Empress leaned back, her attention shifting inward. For centuries, she had relied on certainty and calculation. Yet Elias had introduced variables she had never measured: empathy, creativity, and ingenuity. These were forces no technology or fleet could replicate. "Very well," she said finally. "You have passed the first set of trials, but the galaxy does not operate in isolation. Even your cleverness will be tested further. Tomorrow, you will face challenges that are not simulations but real events where your choices will affect others. You may survive or you may fail, but one thing is certain: every step will show me whether your mind is truly exceptional or if your success so far is merely luck." Elias nodded, undaunted. "I understand, and I am ready." The following day, the Empress orchestrated a more complex scenario. A minor rebellion had broken out on a nearby planet, instigated by factions seeking to exploit human-alien tensions. Elias was given command, not of soldiers, but of information and resources. He had to analyze intelligence, predict movements, and create strategies to resolve the conflict without escalating violence. Using logic, observation, and human negotiation techniques, he coordinated communications between rebellious factions, local leaders, and neutral mediators. He identified misunderstandings and mistrust as the root of the rebellion, addressing them directly. Within hours, what could have become a full-scale war was reduced to tense but manageable negotiations. Rebels disbanded voluntarily, satisfied that their concerns were being heard and addressed. The Empress observed every decision, every action, and found herself both impressed and disturbed. No being had ever handled real-time challenges in such a manner, balancing survival, diplomacy, and morality simultaneously. Elia's approach did not rely on intimidation, force, or manipulation. It relied on human ingenuity and the willingness to think beyond conventional limits. By evening, the Empress called him back to her throne world. "You have impressed me, human," she said, her voice quieter than before, almost reflective. "You survive impossible challenges, succeed where others fail, and yet you are not seeking to dominate. You do not crave power. You act with reason and empathy. Why?" Elias looked at her calmly. "Because survival is not enough. Civilization, peace, and understanding are stronger than force. If we only survive, we are no better than the predators of the galaxy. To endure, we must also uplift, inspire, and protect. That is the human way. The Empress paused. Her attendants shifted uneasily. Elia's words carried a weight that no weapon could. They spoke of purpose, of principle, and of hope, the very qualities that she had long dismissed as weaknesses. Yet now she saw them as a strength, a force that could shape outcomes in ways power alone never could. "You are unusual," she said finally. "Perhaps I underestimated your species. Perhaps there is more to humans than I realized." Elias inclined his head respectfully. "Perhaps, Empress, and perhaps your openness to understanding will determine whether we are friends or enemies." For the first time, the Empress did not speak immediately. She considered the human before her, noting the calm determination in his eyes, the confidence that was not arrogance, and the quiet wisdom that belied his youth. She had faced kings and warriors, empires and fleets, and yet this human challenged her in ways she had never anticipated. And deep within her, a thought began to form, subtle but persistent. Maybe victory is not always measured by power, but by insight, ingenuity, and the courage to stand against impossibility. Elias left the throne chamber that evening with a calm smile. The galaxy was filled with dangers and challenges, yet he had proven one truth already. A single human, armed with intellect, courage, and empathy, could survive, and even thrive, in the presence of the immortal Empress. And he would need all of those qualities, because the trials ahead would grow ever more dangerous, testing not only skill, but character and vision. As he returned to the holding chamber, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. He had not yet won the Empress' approval, nor had he claimed any victory over her. But he had demonstrated something far more important, that humans were not predictable, not weak, and not to be dismissed. The galaxy and the Empress herself had begun to take notice. And somewhere in the vast palace, the immortal Empress found herself wondering, not for the first time in centuries, if she had underestimated humanity. The next morning, the immortal Empress summoned Elias Kane to her private chamber. The room was vast, almost cathedral-like, with walls of crystal that shimmered in shifting colors. Light refracted through the structure in patterns that changed constantly, making the chamber seem alive. The Empress sat upon a smaller throne this time, closer to the center of the room, her presence commanding yet intimate. It was a space designed for judgment, for testing the heart and mind of those who dared approach her. "You have survived the simulations and the initial tests," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of curiosity. "You have displayed ingenuity, courage, and a rare sense of reason, but that was preparation. This will be your true test." Elias stepped forward, his posture steady, his expression composed. "I am ready, Empress." She regarded him for a moment, then waved a hand. The floor beneath him shifted, forming a platform that lifted into the air and moved to the center of the chamber. Around him, holographic projections appeared, this time of the Empress' own empire. Star systems rotated slowly in space, showing planets, fleets, and trade routes. She had chosen not to rely on illusions or combat alone. This was a test of insight, morality, and decision-making in a complex universe. "You will be given 3 scenarios," the Empress explained. "They are real events occurring in different systems under my rule. Your task is to solve them. You have access to information, resources, and diplomatic channels, but you may not use force beyond what is necessary to prevent harm. Many will fail because they cannot think beyond their own survival. You must prove that you can act for the greater good, not for personal gain." The first scenario materialized before him. It was a planetary system where 2 species were on the brink of war over a single resource-rich moon. The simulation presented hundreds of data points: economic output, population density, military positions, and cultural histories. Elias studied the system carefully. Most beings faced with this complexity would act quickly and impulsively, often favoring one side to show decisiveness. Elias did the opposite. He began to analyze patterns of trade, dependency, and diplomacy, looking for connections that had been overlooked. He discovered that the conflict was not truly about the moon. It was about trust. Centuries of minor disputes had festered, creating suspicion and resentment. Using communication channels available in the simulation, Elias sent messages that encouraged dialogue, created shared goals, and proposed joint ventures that benefited both species. He highlighted common threats and common needs, emphasizing collaboration rather than competition. The holographic leaders responded as he anticipated. Tensions eased. Agreements were reached that satisfied both parties. The Empress observed silently, noting every choice, every calculation, and the subtle ways Elias guided the factions without coercion. She had expected brute logic or intimidation. Instead, he had demonstrated diplomacy, foresight, and patience, the qualities that had led humans to survive despite being physically weaker than many species they encountered. The second scenario unfolded. This time, a distant colony world had been struck by a natural disaster, a superstorm that threatened millions of lives. The Empress had placed Elias in charge of coordinating the response. He was given control over communication networks, emergency supplies, and limited transport units. His task was to save as many lives as possible while keeping chaos under control. Elias began by analyzing the storm's projected path and identifying the most vulnerable populations. He directed drones and transport vehicles to deliver supplies and evacuate citizens from high-risk areas. He established communication lines for medical teams and volunteers, ensuring that information flowed clearly and efficiently. But he did more than logistics. He addressed panic, which could often cause more harm than the storm itself. Using public broadcasts, he communicated calmly, giving clear instructions and reassurance. By the time the storm passed in the simulation, thousands had been saved. More importantly, Elias had maintained order, prevented unnecessary conflict, and inspired cooperation among citizens who might have otherwise turned on each other. The Empress felt a subtle tension in her chest. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but their unpredictability came from creativity and resilience, not recklessness. Elias had used this quality to achieve results no alien commander would have expected. The third scenario was the most difficult. Elias was presented with an interstellar dispute between a group of rogue commanders and a neutral colony. The rogue faction had a history of attacking undefended settlements for resources. The challenge was not just to stop attacks, but to prevent escalation without direct military engagement. Elias had access to fleet movements, trade routes, and communication channels. He began by gathering intelligence on the rogue commanders, their motivations, weaknesses, and patterns of behavior. He realized that the commanders were acting out of desperation. Their home system had suffered a catastrophic failure, leaving them resource-starved. Elias sent diplomatic envoys offering alternative solutions, trade agreements, supply shipments, and a promise of assistance in exchange for ceasing hostilities. Some commanders resisted, distrustful of humans and alien authorities alike, but Elias persisted. He created small, controlled victories for them, resources they could use immediately, safety for their people, and recognition of their needs. Slowly, the rogue faction agreed to a ceasefire, and eventually, they accepted long-term solutions that addressed the root causes of conflict rather than the symptoms. The Empress had watched all three scenarios in silence. She was used to seeing leaders rely on intimidation, manipulation, or fear to maintain control. Elias had done none of these. Instead, he had relied on observation, reasoning, empathy, and creativity. He had achieved what she considered impossible. He had solved complex, multi-layered problems in ways she had never anticipated. "You have done well, human," the Empress said at last, her voice quieter than before. "You think differently than any being I have ever encountered. Most fail these trials because they are unwilling or unable to see beyond immediate power and control. You have shown vision, patience, and a willingness to act for the greater good." Elias inclined his head. "I am not perfect, Empress. But I believe that understanding, cooperation, and empathy are more effective than force. Survival is not enough. We must also create solutions that endure and benefit as many as possible." The Empress studied him for a long moment. In her long life, she had never met a being who so clearly demonstrated that intelligence and morality could work hand in hand. Humans were unpredictable, chaotic, and often frustrating, yet they possessed a combination of resilience and ingenuity that could not be measured in fleets or weapons. Elias had reminded her of something she had forgot, or perhaps had never truly understood. "You have proven yourself capable in thought and action," she said finally. "But this is only the beginning. The galaxy is vast, and threats are not always clear or controlled. You must now prove that your principles hold when faced with danger that cannot be simulated. You will be tested by events that occur in real time, where the consequences of your decisions will matter. Will you maintain your approach, or will you bend to fear and force?" Elias nodded calmly. "I will act according to what is right, Empress. Not what is easy or expected or feared. That is the only way to truly make a difference." The Empress leaned back, her expression unreadable. She had seen countless leaders and strategists. None had approached her trials in this manner. None had succeeded in ways that combined intellect, morality, and courage. Elias had not only survived, he had excelled in a manner that threatened her assumptions about power, authority, and control. "You are unusual, human," she said. "I do not know if I admire you or if I fear what your example might inspire." "I do not seek admiration, Empress," Elias said. "I seek understanding and solutions. Fear is not a tool I rely on. It is a weakness that blinds judgment." For a long moment the chamber was silent except for the faint hum of energy in the walls. Then the Empress spoke again, her voice low and contemplative. "Perhaps there is more to your species than I realized. Perhaps humans are not as predictable or as fragile as I assumed. And perhaps that is why you endure." Elias left the chamber that day with a calm sense of purpose. The challenges had been greater than anything he had faced before, yet he had navigated them with human ingenuity, courage, and empathy. He had not only survived, he had demonstrated that humans could approach complex problems in ways no alien species could anticipate. The Empress, meanwhile, remained on her throne, her mind unusually unsettled. She had always believed in the certainty of power and control. Now she faced the reality that one human, armed with nothing but reason, creativity, and courage, could challenge assumptions that had stood for centuries. For the first time in her long life, she wondered what humanity might achieve if given the opportunity to act freely, without fear of suppression or domination. Elia's actions had planted a seed, a subtle but powerful realization that strength is not always measured by weapons or fleets, but by the ability to see clearly, act wisely, and inspire cooperation. He had survived the Empress tests, not by defying her physically, but by demonstrating the unique qualities that made humans unpredictable, resourceful, and resilient. And the immortal Empress, who had never been speechless, found herself quietly observing the human, contemplating the possibility that her empire, vast as it was, might have underestimated a species she had long dismissed. Elias Kane walked back to his quarters, not triumphant but thoughtful. The galaxy was full of challenges and dangers. But he had proven one truth: humans could navigate complexity, inspire cooperation, and act with morality and ingenuity in ways that no empire, even one ruled by an immortal empress, could predict. And somewhere in the quiet vastness of the palace, the Empress considered what it meant to face a human who could survive not through power, but through intellect, courage, and the unshakable belief that reason and compassion could change the universe. For the first time in centuries, she hesitated, not out of fear but out of curiosity. And that hesitation, small as it seemed, would ripple through the galaxy in ways neither she nor anyone else could yet imagine. The next day began with an unexpected disturbance in the Empress communication network. Alerts blared across every control panel of her palace, signaling the approach of a rogue alien fleet known for its ruthlessness and unpredictability. The fleet had bypassed patrols and defenses and was heading straight for a neutral star system, home to thousands of innocents and strategic resources. Most beings in the galaxy would have panicked, calling for immediate weapons deployment. The Empress, however, looked to Elias Kane, who had proven himself with intellect and ingenuity rather than brute force. "You will lead the response," she said, her voice carrying authority yet curiosity. "You may coordinate defenses, but you may not command my fleets directly without my approval. This is real. Lives will be lost if you fail." Elias did not flinch. "Understood," he said. "I will do what is necessary to protect as many as possible, Empress." He was immediately connected to every piece of intelligence available: fleet positions, star maps, logistical support, and communication networks of the star system under threat. While others might have been overwhelmed by the data, Elias approached it systematically. First, he identified the likely path of the rogue fleet based on speed, history, and fuel supply. Then he mapped out vulnerable points where civilians and infrastructure could be evacuated quickly. The Empress watched closely as Elias began issuing instructions. He did not demand compliance or intimidate others. He offered clear plans and reasoning. Human volunteers, alien engineers, and even some of the Empress' own officers followed his guidance, trusting his calm and precise commands. Elias decided the first step was evacuation. Using transport ships, drones, and small shuttles, he organized civilians into secure zones far from the path of the rogue fleet. He anticipated where the attackers might strike first and positioned defenses and decoys accordingly. Most importantly, he considered the morale of those involved. Fear could spread faster than ships, and panic could ruin even the best-laid plans. He communicated continuously, explaining each move and reassuring those under threat. The rogue fleet arrived sooner than expected. Their ships were faster, more heavily armed than the planetary defenses, and capable of overwhelming conventional strategies. Many commanders would have relied on the Empress' technological superiority alone. Elias, however, thought differently. He combined human ingenuity with the Empress technology. He created false signals to confuse the attackers, rerouted ships to bait enemy vessels into traps, and leveraged terrain such as asteroid fields and gravity wells to slow their advance. The first clash occurred in orbit around a medium-sized planet. The rogue fleet fired relentlessly, expecting chaos and destruction. Elias' plan worked. Defense platforms appeared in unexpected positions, coordinated strikes hit weak points, and supply lines remained intact. The fleet was slowed, frustrated, and unable to predict the human-led countermeasures. For the first time, the rogue commanders faced an opponent they could not easily overpower. The Empress observed silently from her chamber. She had faced countless threats, led battles across hundreds of systems, and yet she had never seen a human coordinate defenses with such precision, intuition, and creativity. Elias did not rely on raw firepower alone. He leveraged understanding, planning, and adaptability, the qualities that defined humanity. On the planet below, civilians were moving to safe zones, guided by human volunteers who followed Elias' instructions. Roads, airlocks, and emergency shelters were organized so efficiently that chaos was minimal. Even alien citizens, skeptical of human methods at first, began to cooperate, realizing that Elia's approach worked. His calm reasoning inspired confidence. Hours passed and the rogue fleet began to tire. They could not anticipate the traps, the diversions, or the human-led coordination. Elias noticed their pattern, repeated strikes in the same areas, assuming the defenders would repeat the same mistakes. He exploited this, creating decoy installations and redirecting energy shields to protect actual population centers. Each decision was calculated, adaptive, and efficient. During a brief lull, the Empress appeared beside him via holographic projection. "Your methods are unconventional," she said. "You rely on reasoning, intuition, and improvisation instead of brute force. It is unlike anything I have seen from a human or any other species." Elias did not pause. Brute force is predictable. Intelligence, strategy, and cooperation are harder to counter. We survive not by overpowering, but by thinking, adapting, and using our surroundings. The Empress studied him closely. She had thought humans fragile, limited by physical weakness. Yet here was proof that their strength lay in their minds, their creativity, and their ability to inspire cooperation across species. She found herself intrigued, even impressed, by his calm decisiveness. The rogue fleet pressed harder, attempting a flanking maneuver to bypass defenses and strike critical supply lines. Elias anticipated this. He ordered mobile defense units to create false energy signatures, simulating larger forces than actually existed. He positioned strike drones to ambush isolated enemy ships, ensuring minimal civilian risk. When the rogue commanders saw the apparent strength of the defenses, they hesitated, unsure of their next move. Elias then executed the final stage of his plan, a coordinated counteroffensive that combined human improvisation with alien technology. He had observed weaknesses in the enemy fleet, their reliance on predictable maneuvers and overconfidence in firepower. Using small, fast ships and precise strikes, he disrupted their formations, forcing retreat while preserving the lives of civilians and defenders. The battle was over before night fell on the planet below. The rogue fleet retreated in disarray, unable to comprehend how a single human could have anticipated and countered every move. Damage was minimal, and no lives were lost, a rare outcome in conflicts of this scale. The Empress appeared fully in the chamber this time, her violet eyes fixed on Elias. She was silent for several moments, considering what had just occurred. Then she spoke. "I underestimated you, human. You did not rely on strength, on intimidation, or on fear. You relied on intellect, strategy, and the cooperation of those around you. You have changed my perspective." Elias remained calm. "I did what was necessary, Empress. Lives mattered more than pride or power. We can accomplish more when we work together and think beyond violence." The Empress leaned back, her expression thoughtful. For centuries, she had led with certainty. Empires had risen and fallen under her command. She had measured power, calculated probabilities, and relied on absolute control. Yet Elias had demonstrated that intelligence, creativity, and empathy could achieve outcomes that raw power never could. "You are extraordinary," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "Most would have failed, most would have panicked or miscalculated. You did not." Elias gave a small, respectful bow. "I am human. We are adaptable and we learn from every challenge, but I could not have done it alone. Cooperation is always stronger than individual effort." The Empress considered this. She had ruled alone for centuries, believing in the supremacy of her own intellect and judgment. Yet here was proof that humans, when trusted and respected, could accomplish feats she herself had not anticipated. Elia's actions had preserved lives, protected systems, and maintained order without relying on fear or destruction. That evening, the Empress summoned her advisors, but Elias remained in the chamber. She spoke quietly to him, her voice reflective. "You are changing the way I see the galaxy. I have ruled for centuries, yet you have shown me something I had not considered. That strength is not always measured in fleets, weapons, or control. Sometimes it is measured in intelligence, cooperation, and courage." Elias nodded. "I am glad that you see that, Empress. Humanity has survived countless trials by thinking, adapting, and working together. We believe that even in the darkest moments, there is a solution if we look for it." The Empress fell silent, deep in thought. She had faced many challenges, but Elias had introduced an element she could not control: unpredictability combined with morality. He did not seek domination or conquest. He sought understanding, cooperation, and effective solutions. It was a foreign concept, yet one she found compelling. As night fell on the throne world, Elias sat quietly, reviewing the events of the day. The rogue fleet had been repelled, lives had been saved, and the Empress herself had witnessed firsthand the impact of human ingenuity. He knew that the challenges ahead would grow even greater. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and full of dangers, but humanity had proven time and again that intellect, courage, and cooperation could overcome the greatest odds. And somewhere in the palace, the immortal Empress considered what it meant to face a human who could achieve so much without relying on fear or brute force. For the first time, she wondered if her understanding of power had been incomplete. The human had survived simulations, real-time crises, and complex diplomatic challenges. He had not only proven himself, but he had also inspired trust, cooperation, and hope. Elias Kane had shown that humans were not to be underestimated, and the Empress, who had ruled for centuries without doubt, had begun to see the galaxy in a new light. As the stars shone outside the palace windows, Elias reflected on the truth that had guided him throughout. Survival alone was not enough. To endure, to thrive, and to make a difference, one must think, adapt, and act with purpose. And in doing so, humans could achieve outcomes that even the mightiest of empires could not predict. The Empress, silently observing from her throne, allowed herself a thought she had never admitted aloud. Perhaps victory was not always measured by power, but by intelligence, courage, and the willingness to act for the greater good. Elias Kane had proven that humans could do more than survive. They could inspire, solve, and endure in ways the galaxy had never seen. And the Empress, who had ruled with certainty for centuries, now faced the reality that one human mind could change the course of her empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself. The next morning, the immortal Empress summoned Elias Kane to the central chamber. There was a tension in the air that he had never felt before in her palace. The rogue fleet he had repelled the previous day had not been acting alone. Intelligence now suggested a coalition of factions, all seeking to exploit weakness in her empire. This was the ultimate test. Not simulations, not controlled scenarios, but real events where the stakes could not be ignored. Lives, worlds, and the stability of entire systems were at risk. "You have done well so far, human," the Empress said, her violet eyes sharp yet thoughtful. "You have survived simulations, managed crises, and demonstrated ingenuity beyond expectation. But this is the moment that will prove your true capability. You will face threats that cannot be calculated in advance. You will make decisions that will affect thousands, perhaps millions. Your choices will reveal whether your principles hold under pressure." Elias nodded calmly. "I understand, Empress. I will do my best to protect lives and find solutions that work for everyone." The Empress waved her hand and the central chamber transformed. Holographic projections filled the room. Entire star systems rotated slowly in space, showing fleets, planetary defenses, and the movements of rogue factions. Alerts flashed across the panels, highlighting areas under immediate threat. Elias studied the data carefully, noting patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. He saw the urgency of the situation, yet he did not panic. His mind worked systematically, considering every possible outcome and crafting strategies that balanced safety, efficiency, and diplomacy. The first threat was an attack on a densely populated industrial world. Rogue ships had launched surprise strikes, intending to cripple production and destabilize trade. Elias immediately assessed evacuation routes, supply lines, and defensive capabilities. He directed civilian transports to secure locations, coordinated energy shields to protect key infrastructure, and deployed drones to intercept incoming attacks. His decisions were precise, thoughtful, and calculated, ensuring maximum protection with minimal risk. The rogue fleet underestimated his approach. They expected predictable defensive maneuvers, but Elia's strategy was unconventional. He combined alien technology with human improvisation, using decoys, diversions, and precise strikes to disrupt their formations. Ships that had advanced with confidence now hesitated, unsure of where the true defenses lay. His calm reasoning turned potential disaster into an organized, manageable situation. The Empress observed silently, her expression unreadable. She had anticipated panic, chaos, or reliance on sheer force. Elias demonstrated none of these. Instead, he coordinated, anticipated, and acted with a clarity that challenged centuries of her understanding. For the first time, she realized that human minds were not limited by convention or intimidation. They thrived on creativity, insight, and collaboration. Next, a humanitarian crisis unfolded on a mining colony threatened by a massive seismic event. The situation required immediate action to prevent mass casualties. Elias quickly analyzed structural weaknesses, population distribution, and emergency resources. He organized evacuations, reinforced critical structures with automated drones, and guided local authorities to prioritize vulnerable groups. As the crisis unfolded, Elias noticed a subtle flaw in the colony's energy grid, a vulnerability the Empress advisors had overlooked. If ignored, it could trigger widespread damage and loss of life. Using quick thinking and improvisation, he rerouted energy flows and stabilized the system, preventing disaster. The colonists, unaware of the near catastrophe, followed his instructions calmly, inspired by his confidence and clarity. The Empress, observing every decision, felt an unfamiliar stirring. Elia's actions were not just effective, they were humane. He considered not only survival but the dignity, safety, and well-being of every life under threat. She had ruled through authority and fear, yet this human achieved more with reason, care, and ingenuity. The final and most challenging scenario emerged. A coalition of rogue fleets intended to converge on a strategically critical planet, planning simultaneous attacks to cripple the Empire's defenses. The fleet commanders were experienced, ruthless, and confident. They expected overwhelming force to crush opposition. Elias understood the stakes. He would have to act decisively, yet without relying solely on firepower. He began by analyzing fleet movements, predicting their strategies based on historical patterns, fuel reserves, and psychological behavior. He then implemented a multi-layered defense, redirecting ships to create bottlenecks, deploying decoy signals to mislead enemy commanders, and coordinating energy shields around critical assets. At the same time, he reached out to potential allies within the coalition, appealing to reason and offering mutually beneficial solutions. Hours passed as the battle unfolded. Rogue commanders were forced to respond to unexpected obstacles, slowing their advance and causing confusion among their ranks. Elia's calm leadership inspired confidence in the defending forces, which moved in precise coordination rather than panicked reaction. His combination of foresight, strategy, and empathy ensured that civilian casualties were minimal and infrastructure damage was controlled. The Empress watched closely. She had anticipated a fierce confrontation, expecting failure or heavy losses. Yet Elia's approach was methodical, creative, and humane. He turned potential catastrophe into a controlled resolution, achieving outcomes that raw power alone could not deliver. For the first time, she questioned everything she had known about leadership, strategy, and the nature of strength. After the final confrontation, the coalition forces withdrew, their plans thwarted without a single unnecessary loss. Entire fleets had been outmaneuvered not by force, but by human intellect, creativity, and adaptability. The Empress regarded Elias with a mix of awe, curiosity, and perhaps something closer to respect. "You have accomplished the impossible," she said softly. "You have managed crises that would have destroyed lesser beings. You have saved lives, preserved order, and done so without relying on fear, intimidation, or overwhelming force. How is it that a human, fragile, small, and physically weak compared to most beings I command, can achieve so much?" Elias bowed slightly. "We are not the strongest physically, Empress, but we endure because we think, adapt, and work together. Strength is more than weapons or fleets. It is understanding, creativity, and the courage to act wisely even when the odds are against us." The Empress considered his words. She had ruled with certainty for centuries, believing that power, control, and fear were the ultimate tools of leadership. Elias had proven her wrong. Humanity's strength lay not in domination, but in insight, ingenuity, and moral courage. She had witnessed a single human face challenges that would have overwhelmed entire species, and succeed where many had failed. "You are extraordinary," she admitted. "I have faced kings, generals, and empires, yet you have shown me something I did not know could exist. Perhaps humans are not merely survivors, they are innovators, problem solvers, and catalysts for change." Elias smiled calmly. "We are not perfect, Empress, but we strive to endure, adapt, and improve. That is what makes us resilient. And perhaps it is what makes us valuable allies rather than adversaries." For the first time, the Empress leaned back in her throne and allowed herself a genuine reflection. Centuries of rule had given her perspective, power, and certainty, yet Elias had introduced a variable she could not measure: the combination of intellect, empathy, and courage that defined humanity. He had proven that survival, strategy, and morality could coexist and create outcomes beyond prediction. "You have changed the way I see the galaxy," she said finally. "Not through force, not through conquest, but through action, reason, and compassion. You have reminded me that strength is not only in power, but in understanding, foresight, and moral courage." Elias inclined his head respectfully. "I am honored, Empress. My goal has always been to protect life, resolve conflicts, and demonstrate that even small actions can have a meaningful impact." The Empress regarded him silently for a long moment. Then, with a gesture that surprised even her attendants, she extended her hand. "You have earned my trust, human. Your actions have shown me the value of reasoning, creativity, and empathy. Perhaps it is time that my empire, vast as it is, recognizes the potential of humanity not as subjects, but as partners." Elias accepted her hand, a symbolic gesture that marked a turning point. In that moment, centuries of rigid rule met human adaptability and courage. The galaxy itself seemed to shift subtly, as if acknowledging the unprecedented event. A human had not only survived the trials of the immortal Empress, but had also reshaped her understanding of leadership, power, and possibility. News of Elia's success spread quickly across the empire. Reports highlighted his ingenuity, strategic brilliance, and moral clarity. Humans were no longer considered weak or insignificant. They were seen as capable, resilient, and uniquely valuable. The Empress, who had once ruled with absolute certainty, now acknowledged that strength could take many forms, and that one human could indeed influence the course of entire star systems. In the quiet of the palace, Elias reflected on the journey. He had faced simulations, crises, and real threats. He had guided allies, protected civilians, and challenged centuries of assumptions. And through it all, he had demonstrated the truth that humans could achieve extraordinary results through intellect, courage, empathy, and collaboration. The Empress observed him, her expression thoughtful but changed. She had seen the galaxy through countless conflicts, victories, and losses, yet she had never witnessed a human approach problems with such balance, creativity, and humanity. Elias had not only survived, he had inspired, educated, and altered perceptions in ways she had never imagined. As the stars shone beyond the palace windows, Elias Kane knew that the future was uncertain, but it was full of possibilities. Humanity had proven itself, not as conquerors, not as subjects, but as partners capable of facing any challenge with ingenuity, courage, and purpose. And the immortal Empress, who had never hesitated in centuries, had learned a lesson that no weapon or fleet could ever teach. The strength of a human mind could change the galaxy itself. In the silence of the chamber, the Empress finally spoke. "Perhaps you have shown me the true meaning of strength, Elias Kane. Not power, not fear, but wisdom, courage, and the willingness to act for what is right. The galaxy will never be the same because of you and because of humanity." Elias nodded, quietly proud but not boastful. "I only acted according to what I believe is right, but if my actions inspire change, then perhaps that is enough." For the first time in centuries, the immortal Empress smiled, not with arrogance but with understanding. The galaxy had shifted, and a single human had played a pivotal role. Elias Kane had not only survived the trials of the Empress, he had shown that humans could endure, inspire, and transform in ways the universe had never anticipated. And so the galaxy moved forward into a new era, one shaped not by fear or domination, but by ingenuity, courage, and the enduring human spirit.